Fix my Porsche and I'll marry you. The billionaire CEO laughed, never realizing those words would become the moment she discovered the man everyone overlooked. The polished floors of Hayes Automotive's private service center reflected the morning sunlight as Victoria Hayes stood beside her midnight blue Porsche 911, surrounded by executives, engineers, and people who were used to solving problems with money. She was the kind of woman whose name appeared on business magazines, whose decisions moved companies, and whose time was measured in million-dollar meetings. But that morning, her perfect world had been interrupted by a car that refused to start. The best engineers in the country couldn't figure it out. One assistant said quietly. Maybe it just needs someone with patience, another replied. Then Ethan Walker walked in. He was not wearing a designer suit. He did not carry a tablet filled with company reports. He wore a simple work shirt, faded jeans, and the calm expression of a man who had spent years fixing things that others had already given up on. Some people looked past him immediately. To them, he was just another small-town mechanic. They did not know the quiet man standing in front of them had once lived in a completely different world. Ethan wiped his hands with a cloth and looked at the Porsche. What seems to be the problem? Victoria crossed her arms with a small smile. That car has confused experts for days. Are you sure you want to try? Ethan looked at the vehicle, then back at her. Cars usually tell you what is wrong. You just have to listen. A few people nearby laughed softly. Victoria smiled, amused by his confidence. All right then, she said. Fix my Porsche and I'll marry you. The room filled with surprised laughter. It was clearly a joke, a playful challenge from a woman who was used to controlling every situation. Ethan did not laugh. He simply nodded and opened the hood. I'll focus on the car, he said calmly. That answer made Victoria pause. Most people around her tried to impress her. They wanted approval, attention, or a chance to stand closer to her success. But Ethan acted as if she was simply another person who needed help. Outside the large glass windows, the city continued moving. Inside, the room slowly became quieter. Ethan studied every detail with careful attention. He listened to the engine, checked the connections, and examined the smallest signs most people ignored. His movements were patient, almost familiar, like someone reconnecting with an old friend. Victoria watched from a distance, curiosity replacing amusement. There was something different about him, something she could not explain. The man who looked ordinary carried himself with a confidence that did not need applause. And while everyone waited for him to fail, nobody noticed that Ethan Walker was not trying to prove anything. He was simply doing what he had always done, solving problems quietly, helping without expecting anything in return. But what Victoria did not know was that the simple repair in front of her was about to reveal a truth that would change the way she saw him forever. Before the world knew his name, Ethan Walker was already fighting a different kind of battle every morning. Not with enemies, not with impossible machines, but with the quiet challenges that came with being a father who carried every responsibility alone. Long before he stood inside a luxury service center beneath bright city lights, his day began in a small two-bedroom house on the edge of town. At 5:15 in the morning, while the rest of the neighborhood was still sleeping, Ethan was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the room as he packed a lunch for his daughter, Lily, and carefully placed a handwritten note inside her backpack. Have a great day. I love you. Simple words, but to Ethan, they were worth more than anything money could buy. Lily was 8 years old, curious, kind, and the reason he kept moving forward when life became difficult. Dad, are you coming to my science presentation today? She asked one morning while tying her shoes near the front door. Ethan smiled and picked up her backpack. I would not miss it for the world. He said it with confidence, even though he knew he would have to rearrange his entire work schedule to keep that promise. That was who Ethan Walker was. A man who made promises carefully because he understood the value of keeping them. Years ago, people knew him for something completely different. He had worked around advanced automotive designs, studied engineering, and spent countless nights creating solutions that others thought were impossible. But after losing the person who had shared his dreams and becoming the only parent his daughter could depend on, Ethan chose a quieter path. He traded conference rooms for repair shops. He traded recognition for responsibility. He did not regret it, because every evening when Lily ran through the door with a smile and called him Dad, he knew he had chosen the right thing. At Hayes Automotive, however, nobody knew that story. They only saw the man standing beside a billionaire CEO's Porsche with oil marks on his hands. They saw a mechanic, not a man who had once been surrounded by innovation and opportunity. Victoria Hayes watched him from across the service center, noticing something she rarely saw in her world: peace. Everyone around her was always trying to prove something. They competed for attention, approval, and success. But Ethan seemed comfortable being invisible. As he continued examining the Porsche, one of Victoria's engineers approached with a doubtful expression. "Are you sure he knows what he is doing?" he asked. Victoria looked back at Ethan. For the first time that morning, she did not have an answer, because something about him felt different. He was not trying to impress her. He was not trying to become part of her world. He was simply focused on doing the job in front of him. And somewhere between the quiet sound of tools moving and the soft hum of the garage lights, Victoria began to realize that the most valuable people are often the ones who never ask to be noticed. The longer Ethan Walker worked on the Porsche, the quieter the room became. The laughter from earlier had disappeared, replaced by a strange curiosity that even Victoria Hayes could not ignore. She had spent years surrounded by people who rushed to impress her, people who wanted to show how much they knew before they had even understood the problem. But Ethan was different. He did not make promises. He did not make excuses. He simply listened. "The engine is not the real problem," Ethan said calmly. Victoria stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Ethan pointed toward a small section beneath the hood. The system was adjusted to hide a deeper issue. Someone focused on improving performance, but overlooked the balance of the entire design. One of the engineers standing nearby frowned. "That does not make sense. We checked every major component." Ethan looked at him, not with arrogance, but with patience. Sometimes the biggest problems are hidden inside the smallest details. Those words stayed with Victoria. She was used to hearing confidence from people who wanted power. Ethan's confidence came from experience. There was no performance, no need to be admired, only quiet certainty. As the repair continued, Victoria noticed details she had never paid attention to before. The way Ethan carefully organized his tools. The way he examined every part before making a decision. The way he treated the expensive Porsche with the same respect he gave an ordinary family vehicle. To him, it was not about the price of the car. It was about understanding something that someone else cared about. "You really do not care who owns this car, do you?" Victoria asked. Ethan looked up briefly. A machine does not run better because of the name on the registration. Victoria smiled slightly. It was a simple answer, but it was unlike anything she usually heard. In her world, names opened doors. Names created opportunities. Names changed how people behaved. Yet this man seemed completely unaffected by hers. A few hours earlier, Victoria had seen Ethan as a small-town mechanic standing in a place far below her world. Now she found herself wondering about the world he came from. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked. Ethan paused for a moment. His expression changed slightly, as if an old memory had quietly returned. "I spent many years learning from people who loved creating things." It was not a complete answer. Victoria noticed that, but she also noticed he did not avoid the question out of insecurity. He avoided it because he was not looking for recognition. Outside the service center, the afternoon sun moved across the city streets. Inside, the Porsche slowly came back to life. When Ethan turned the key, the engine responded with a smooth, confident sound that filled the room. Everyone looked at the vehicle. Everyone except Ethan. He simply closed the hood and stepped back. "She should be good now." Victoria looked at the Porsche, then at the man who had fixed it. For the first time in years, a question entered her mind that had nothing to do with business. Who exactly was Ethan Walker? Because the quiet mechanic standing in front of her seemed like someone who had spent years hiding a story far greater than anyone imagined. Victoria Hayes had spent her entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from her. A business deal, a connection, a chance to stand closer to the success she had built. But Ethan Walker wanted nothing. And that was the one thing she could not understand. The service center slowly returned to its normal rhythm as employees moved around the garage, but Victoria remained standing near the Porsche, watching the man who had treated her million-dollar vehicle like it was simply another machine waiting for attention. "You did not even ask who I was," she said. Ethan looked over his shoulder. "Should I have?" The question was simple. Almost too simple. Victoria Post. In her world, everyone knew who she was. Her name was printed on buildings, contracts, and financial reports. Yet this man had looked at her without seeing a title. He had only seen someone who needed help. "Most people would have recognized me," she said. Ethan gave a small smile. "Most people are probably busy looking for reasons to be impressed." Those words stayed with her. Not because they were insulting. They were not. They were honest. And honesty was something Victoria rarely received without a hidden intention behind it. As Ethan packed his tools, one of the senior engineers walked over and looked at the Porsche with disbelief. "I have to admit, that was impressive," he said. "But I still do not understand how you found the issue so quickly." Ethan shrugged. "Experience teaches you to notice what others ignore." The engineer nodded slowly, but Victoria noticed something else. Ethan never looked proud. He never waited for compliments. He never tried to make anyone feel smaller so he could feel bigger. That was unusual. Very unusual. Later that afternoon, Victoria sat in her office overlooking the city skyline. The glass walls reflected the same woman the world always saw. The billionaire CEO. The powerful executive. The person who could make decisions worth millions of dollars before lunch. But for some reason, her thoughts kept returning to a mechanic from small garage. She opened the service report on her tablet. Ethan Walker. The name looked ordinary. Almost too ordinary. She searched through the information available to her company systems. There was very little. No impressive online profile. No public interviews. No signs that he wanted attention. Just a simple work history and a reputation for being dependable. Then she noticed something strange. A gap. Several years where there was almost no information at all. Victoria leaned closer. She had spent her career finding missing details. Missing details often told the biggest stories. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was back in his small house, helping Lily finish her science project at the kitchen table. "Dad, how did you know how to fix that fancy car?" she asked. Ethan smiled while helping her organize her notes. "I have learned a few things over the years." Lily looked at him carefully. "Were you always a mechanic?" Ethan paused for a moment. Outside the window, the evening light touched the quiet neighborhood. "No," he answered softly. "I used to build things." Lily smiled. "I think you still do." Ethan looked at his daughter and realized she understood something many adults never noticed. A person's value was never determined by where they stood today. It was shaped by everything they carried silently through the years. And while Victoria searched for answers about Ethan Walker, she was about to discover that the quiet man who fixed her Porsche had once been someone the entire automotive world knew. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Hayes Automotive felt different. The same polished floors, the same glass. Walls, the same employees walking quickly through the building, but something had changed. People were talking about Ethan Walker. Not loudly, not with certainty, more like a question they could not answer. "Who is that mechanic?" One employee whispered near the conference room. "How did he solve a problem our team missed?" Another replied. Victoria Hayes heard the conversations as she walked past, but she said nothing. She had spent years building a reputation for making decisions based on facts, not emotions. Yet Ethan had created a question she could not ignore. She needed answers. That afternoon, Victoria invited her engineering team into a private meeting. The Porsche repair report was displayed on the large screen at the front of the room. Several experts reviewed the details carefully. The adjustments he made were extremely precise, one engineer admitted. Whoever taught him understood advanced vehicle systems. Victoria looked at the information in silence. "Find out who he is," she finally said. The team began searching through professional records, automotive databases, and public information. At first, there was nothing unusual. Ethan Walker appeared to be exactly what everyone assumed. A mechanic, a father, a man living a quiet life. But then one researcher stopped. "Wait," he said softly. "There is something here." The room became quiet. Years earlier, before Ethan disappeared from the automotive industry, his name had appeared in several technical documents connected to innovative vehicle design. Not as a CEO, not as a company founder, but as a brilliant engineer whose ideas had influenced future developments. Victoria looked at the screen. "Why did he leave?" she asked. Nobody had a clear answer. The information simply ended. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his normal routine. He repaired cars at the local garage, picked Lily up from school, and spent evenings helping her with homework. To everyone around him, he was still just Ethan, the man who arrived early, the man who stayed late, the man who never complained. His co-worker, Marcus, noticed something unusual. "You know that woman from yesterday was not just another customer, right?" Marcus asked, while organizing tools. Ethan smiled slightly. "I figured that out." Marcus laughed. "And you still treated her the same?" Ethan looked at the garage door as sunlight came through the windows. "People deserve respect before they earn anything from you." Marcus became quiet. That answer explained more about Ethan than any resume ever could. Later that evening, Victoria drove past the small neighborhood where Ethan lived. She did not know why she came there. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper. She saw him outside with Lily, repairing an old bicycle together in the driveway. There were no cameras, no business meetings, no people trying to impress him, just a father spending time with his daughter. Victoria watched for a moment and realized something she had forgotten in her own world of success. Wealth could buy comfort. Influence could open doors, but it could not create the kind of peace she saw in that simple moment. And for the first time, Victoria wondered if the man she thought she was investigating was actually the person who was teaching her something she never learned. The following morning, the quiet garage where Ethan Walker worked felt strangely different. The same old tools hung on the walls. The same familiar smell of oil and metal filled the air. But now, there was something everyone could feel. Respect. People who once walked past Ethan without noticing him were suddenly paying attention. Not because he had changed, but because they had finally started seeing him. "You really did not tell anyone who you were?" Marcus asked while placing a set of tools back on the workbench. Ethan looked confused. "Who I was?" Marcus shook his head with a smile. "You know what I mean. The engineering records, the designs, the work you did years ago." Ethan looked down at the vehicle he was repairing. "That was a long time ago. Most people would be proud," Marcus replied. "Most people would want everyone to know." Ethan gently tightened a bolt and smiled. "I already know what I did. I did not need everyone else to remember." Those words carried the same quiet strength Victoria had noticed before. Meanwhile, inside the headquarters of Hayes Automotive, Victoria stood in front of a large screen reviewing Ethan's history. The information was incomplete, but the pieces were enough to reveal a remarkable story. Years earlier, Ethan Walker had been considered one of the most promising automotive engineers of his generation. His ideas had helped improve vehicle efficiency, performance, and reliability. His name appeared in documents connected to projects worth millions of dollars. But then, without warning, he disappeared from that world. No dramatic announcement. No public explanation. He simply walked away. "People do not usually leave opportunities like this," Victoria said quietly. Her assistant looked through the records. There was a personal reason. After a major change in his family life, he decided to step back. Victoria stared at the screen. For years, she had believed success meant reaching higher, moving faster, and never looking back. But Ethan had chosen something different. He had chosen responsibility. That evening, Victoria visited the garage again. Ethan looked surprised when he saw her arrive. "Everything all right with the Porsche?" he asked. "Victoria smiled. The Porsche is fine." She looked around the small workspace. "I came because I wanted to understand something." Ethan waited. "Why did you leave all of that behind?" she asked. The question was direct, but her voice was different this time. There was no judgment, only genuine curiosity. Ethan placed his tools down and looked through the open garage door. The sunset painted the street with warm golden light. Because sometimes life asks you to choose what matters most. Victoria listened carefully. "And what mattered most?" Ethan smiled softly. "Being there for my daughter." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The answer was simple, but it carried a weight that money could never measure. Victoria had spent years building an empire But standing there with Ethan, she realized something important. A person could have every resource in the world and still miss the things that truly mattered. Ethan had lost opportunities, but he had gained something priceless. A life built on love, trust, and quiet moments. And as Victoria looked at the man she once thought was just a mechanic, she finally understood the truth. The greatest achievements are not always the ones displayed in headlines. Sometimes they are the ones created silently, one day at a time, by someone who never expected applause. Victoria Hayes had built her entire career by finding answers before anyone else knew there was question. She could read market changes, predict business trends, and recognize opportunities hidden inside complicated situations. But Ethan Walker was different. He was not a business problem waiting to be solved. He was a person with a story that had been carefully kept away from the world. After leaving the garage that evening, Victoria could not stop thinking about one thing. Why would someone with Ethan's talent choose a quiet life instead of a place among the most powerful people in the automotive industry? The next morning, she returned to her office and asked her research team to look deeper. Not because she wanted to expose him, not because she wanted to use his past. She simply wanted to understand. Hours later, a file appeared on her desk. Inside were documents that changed everything. Ethan Walker had not just been a skilled engineer. Years earlier, he had been part of a small group of innovators who helped create advanced vehicle technology that later became standard across the industry. His designs were studied by engineers around the country. His ideas had influenced companies that were now worth billions of dollars. But the most surprising part was not what he had achieved. It was what he had refused. Several companies had offered him leadership positions. Some had offered him partnerships. Some had offered him the kind of wealth most people spent their entire lives chasing. Ethan turned them all down. Victoria stared at the documents for a long time. She expected to find ambition. She expected to find someone who had simply disappeared after making enough money. Instead, she found something much rarer. A man who walked away because something mattered more. Later that afternoon, Victoria visited the garage again. Ethan was working on an older family vehicle when she arrived. He looked up and smiled politely. "Another car problem?" he asked. Victoria shook her head. "No, I wanted to talk." Ethan placed his tools down and gave her his attention. "I found your old records." For a moment, silence filled the garage. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence where people choose their next words carefully. Ethan looked toward the shelves of tools around him. "I wondered when someone would find them." Victoria was surprised. "You knew someone would?" Ethan nodded. "People eventually find what they are looking for." "Then why hide it?" she asked. Ethan took a slow breath. "Because I did not want my daughter to grow up thinking a person's value comes from achievements alone." Victoria listened closely. "I wanted Lily to know that being a good father mattered, that showing up mattered, that kindness mattered." The answer touched something inside Victoria. She had spent years surrounded by people measuring success through numbers, rankings, and accomplishments. But Ethan measured success through moments nobody else could see. A packed lunch, a promise kept, a conversation at the kitchen table, small things that created a meaningful life. As Victoria looked at him, she realized the biggest surprise was not that Ethan had once been a brilliant engineer. The biggest surprise was that after gaining the ability to become anything, he chose to become exactly the person his daughter needed. And for the first time, Victoria understood that true greatness was not always found in the people standing above everyone else. Sometimes it was found in the person quietly standing beside the people who mattered most. For the first time in many years, Victoria Hayes found herself questioning the world she had built around her. She had spent most of her life surrounded by success, surrounded by people who measured everything through numbers, achievements, and influence. But Ethan Walker had shown her something different. He had shown her that a meaningful life could exist far away from attention and recognition. A few days after their conversation at the garage, Victoria returned to the small town where Ethan lived. She told herself it was simply a business visit. She told herself she wanted to understand the engineering ideas he once created. But deep inside, she knew there was another reason. She wanted to understand the man behind the quiet smile. When she arrived, She found Ethan outside his home, helping Lily prepare for a school event. The scene was simple. No assistants, no luxury cars, no business meetings. Just a father and daughter sharing an ordinary afternoon. "You are really good at disappearing from the world," Victoria said with a gentle smile. Ethan looked up and laughed softly. "I'm not disappearing. I'm just living somewhere people do not usually look." That answer stayed with her. Victoria had spent years being seen by everyone, yet very few people actually knew her. They knew the CEO. They knew the billionaire. They knew the woman whose decisions affected thousands of employees. But they rarely asked about Victoria Hayes herself. As they talked, she revealed something she had never shared with many people. Behind the success and confidence was a woman who had spent years carrying the pressure of always being strong. "Everyone thinks having everything means you have nothing to worry about," she said quietly. Ethan listened without interrupting. That was something Victoria noticed immediately. In her world, people often waited for their chance to speak. Ethan waited because he cared about understanding. "People see the company," Victoria continued. "They see the money. They see the achievements. But sometimes they forget there is a person behind all of it." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes people forget the same thing about themselves." The words were simple, but they reached deeper than any advice she had ever received. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself spending more time away from the corporate world and more time learning about Ethan's life. She watched how he treated everyone with respect. She watched how Lily looked at him with complete trust. She watched how a man who had lost so much still chose kindness every single day. Ethan also began seeing Victoria differently. She was no longer just the powerful CEO who arrived in an expensive car. She was someone who carried her own struggles quietly. Someone who had achieved everything society told her to want, yet still searched for something money could not provide. Their worlds were different, but their hearts understood the same truth. Everyone carries invisible stories. Everyone needs to be seen for who they truly are. And as two people from completely different lives slowly began to understand each other, Victoria realized something she had never expected. The man who repaired her car had not just fixed a machine. He had helped her discover a part of herself that had been forgotten for years. The small garage on the edge of town had never been a place where people expected miracles to happen. It was just a place with old tools, worn workbenches, and the familiar sound of engines coming back to life. But for Ethan Walker, it had always been more than a garage. It was a place where people brought broken things, hoping someone would understand what they needed. And sometimes, people needed the same thing as machines. They needed someone to listen. Months had passed since Victoria Hayes first walked into that garage, and the world between them had changed in ways neither of them expected. Victoria still ran one of the most successful companies in the country. Ethan still repaired vehicles, helped his daughter with homework, and lived a quiet life. But now there was something different. There was respect. There was trust. There was a connection built not on status or success, but on understanding. One afternoon, Victoria returned to the garage carrying a small box. Ethan looked surprised. "What is that?" he asked. "Victoria smiled. Something I should have brought a long time ago." Inside the box was a restored piece of automotive history, a small part from one of Ethan's earliest designs. "I found it in our archives," she explained. "Your work helped shape an entire generation of vehicles." Ethan looked at the piece quietly. For a moment, the past returned. The late nights, the dreams, the excitement of creating something new. Then he smiled and placed it back in a box. "It was a good time of my life," he said. Victoria studied him. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan looked toward the garage window, where sunlight touched. The empty driveway. "Sometimes, but I do not miss who I was before I understood what mattered." Those words reminded Victoria of the man she first met. A man who did not need applause. A man who did not measure his worth through achievements. A man who had discovered that success was not only about what you built, but who you became while building it. Later that evening, Victoria joined Ethan and Lily for dinner. It was not a luxury restaurant. There were no cameras, no business conversations, and no people trying to impress anyone. It was simply a small table, warm food, and honest conversation. Lily looked at Victoria and smiled. You know, my dad fixes everything. Victoria laughed softly. Everything? Lily nodded seriously. Almost everything. Ethan smiled. I think she exaggerates. But Victoria understood what Lily meant. Ethan did not fix everything with tools. He fixed moments. He repaired trust. He reminded people that kindness still mattered. As the evening ended, Victoria looked around the simple home and realized something important. For years, she believed she needed to find someone who could stand beside her success. But Ethan showed her that the right person was not someone who added to your achievements. It was someone who reminded you of your humanity. The world would continue chasing wealth, recognition, and power. But Ethan Walker had discovered something many people never find. A life filled with dignity, purpose, and love. And in the quiet moments when nobody was watching, that was the greatest success of all.